It all started with a trail of footprints. Not to my door, not around the house, just straight to the driver's side of my truck, and back into the woods. Brace yourself. I don't care if this sounds insane, I need to get it out. I've told just about everyone I can, my family, my neighbors, random people online. Even a couple of local news outlets. But it never feels like enough. There's something in me, something wired deep, that's screaming for this story to be heard. Maybe it's fear. Or maybe it's a warning. This all started years ago. I mean years. I can't pinpoint the exact moment, but let's say around 2012. Maybe 2013 at the latest. I was in my mid-20s then, working a stable job, and dating the woman who's now my fiancée. I never went to college, so I'd been in the workforce a while, just grinding like most people. My life was steady. Predictable. And I didn't see that changing anytime soon. Back then, my girlfriend and I had just moved into the house I grew up in, an old brick place my parents passed down to me. My dad inherited it from his parents when he hit 40, so yeah, this house was deep in the family line. It had been renovated a few times, but you could still feel its age. The brick gave it away. Not many homes like it around here, so it stands out, maybe a little too much. The neighborhood itself is heavily wooded. Our house sits at the very end of the street, which means we don't just back up to the forest, we're practically swallowed by it on two sides. As a kid, my brothers and I would wander those woods for hours and never reach the end. They go on forever. Some people find that kind of thing eerie. I always found it peaceful. I've always preferred solitude. Still do. Anyway, we'd only been living there a few months when things started getting weird. It was winter, no clue what month, but there was fresh snow on the ground. I remember that clearly. It was early on a Sunday morning, probably just after 8 a.m., my one day to sleep in. I was heading out to treat myself to coffee, like I always did. Just a small ritual to shake off the week. I stepped outside and noticed something off almost immediately. There were footprints in the snow. Not just anywhere, right next to my truck. At first, I figured maybe my girlfriend had gotten up before me and gone outside for something. But that didn't add up. The trail didn't go near the house, and it didn't come from inside. The prints led from the woods, straight across the front yard, and stopped at the driver's side of my vehicle. Then they turned around. Whoever it was never touched the house, never peered through a window. They just walked out of the forest, up to my truck, and vanished the way they came. I stood there in the cold, totally confused. I even asked my girlfriend later, but of course, it wasn't her. She hadn't even been awake when I left. I wish I remembered more details from that morning, but it's all fuzzy now. Time has a way of smudging things, even when they should stick with you. The next event didn't happen until a couple winters later. I remember it clearly because it was 2015, the year the Seahawks lost the Super Bowl to Brady. That morning, I stepped outside and immediately knew something wasn't right. The yard was covered in prints. I don't mean a few here and there. I mean everywhere. Around the entire perimeter of the house. At every window. Up and down the driveway. Like someone had been pacing, watching, waiting. I'm not the kind of guy who scares easy, but I'd be lying if I said my heart didn't start racing. I was already late for work, so I didn't have much time to inspect them. But I did do a quick run around the property to make sure no one was lurking. That's all I could manage in the moment. As I backed out of the driveway, I fired off a quick text to my girlfriend. Just to let her know. I didn't want her freaking out if she saw it for herself later. Still, the whole thing ate at me. Bad. I ended up leaving work early that day, couldn't focus. Couldn't stop thinking about those prints. Because something had changed. This time, it wasn't just a curiosity. This time, it felt like we were being watched. The prints were back. Only this time, they didn't just stop at my truck. They went straight to the shed. And inside, tools were missing. By the time I made it home that afternoon, my fiancée was already outside, waving me over with this wide-eyed, unsettled look on her face. I parked and hurried over, and she pointed to one of the trails in the snow. "Something's wrong," she said. "I've been looking at this all day, and it doesn't make sense." At first I wasn't seeing it, just more of the same tracks from that morning. But then it clicked. There were no shoe prints. Not a single tread. Just the unmistakable shape of bare human feet, pressed deep into the snow. I felt like an idiot for not catching it sooner. My stomach twisted. Who the hell walks around barefoot in the middle of winter? It had to be below freezing that morning. My fiancé tried to rationalize it, suggesting maybe it was some sort of animal, but I knew what I saw: 5 toes, an arch, a heel. Human. We went back inside, freaked out, and called my dad to ask if anything like this had ever happened before. He lived in that house most of his life, through blizzards, blackouts, and break-ins, but even he sounded shaken. "No," he said flatly. "Not once. You need to grab your rifle and find out who's screwing around out there." I didn't want to. God, I really didn't want to. But I knew he was right. That's part of living where we live. You don't just wait for someone else to deal with it. My fiancé pushed for calling the cops, but I knew they'd shrug it off. No crime had been committed, technically. And even if someone had been on our property, it's not like they left a calling card. Footprints in the snow aren't exactly hard evidence. So I promised I'd call the police if I found anything deeper in the woods. She agreed, reluctantly. I set a personal rule too: as soon as the sun started to dip, I'd head back. I threw my rifle over my shoulder and followed the trail into the forest. I don't know how long I was out there, maybe half an hour, when the footprints suddenly branched. One trail split into 2, heading off in different directions like a fork in the path. That stopped me cold. At first, I figured maybe whoever I was tracking had doubled back to throw me off. But then a more disturbing idea crept in. What if there wasn't just one person? What if there were 2? The thought messed with my head. Up until then, I'd been treating this like a lone weirdo wandering in the woods. But the idea that I might be outnumbered, that I could be walking into a group of strangers who already knew these woods better than I did, that changed things. I stood there for a while, frozen, not from the cold, but from a sudden, gnawing unease in my gut. Eventually, I turned back. It was getting late anyway. On the hike back, my mind wouldn't quit. I kept replaying the layout of the prints, trying to make sense of it. If 2 people had been walking in the same steps, wouldn't one have slipped up at least once? It'd be nearly impossible to do that perfectly. Then I thought, what if someone walked backward from deeper in the forest? To make it look like they were headed in, not out? Or worse, what if someone had been carrying another person? I didn't know which liarmy was more disturbing. That night, we finally called the police. As expected, they said there wasn't much they could do. No crime. No real evidence. Just weird tracks in the snow. I told my fiancé I'd try again the next day, maybe get lucky and pick up a trail. But it snowed. Hard. By morning, everything was gone. Clean slate. Like it never happened. We were on edge, but over time, things died down. That was the last time anything happened that winter. Weeks passed. Then months. Then years. Life moved on. We even got engaged in the meantime. Planning the wedding helped push all the creepy memories to the back of our minds. Honestly, I thought we'd finally moved past it. But I wouldn't be writing this if the story ended there. This was no prank. The footprints were back, and this time, they'd broken into the shed. It happened just after New Year's. January, cold, bleak, and quiet. I woke up one morning and pulled the curtains back like any other day, and there they were. Footprints. All over the yard. All the memories, all the fear we'd buried deep, it came crashing back. My fiancée broke down in the bedroom. She kept asking me if we were ever really safe. I didn't know how to answer. But it was worse this time. The prints led right up to the shed. When I opened it, I found tools missing. Not just a wrench or 2, several. As if someone had gone in with a purpose. God knows what else they did. What else they touched. I was furious. I called my buddy Liam, someone I trusted, ex-military, a serious hunter, and someone who didn't scare easy. I explained everything and asked if he'd help me track this down. He didn't even hesitate. A few hours later, he pulled into the driveway with gear packed and ready. My fiancée was pale with worry, but I assured her we'd handle it. We dressed for the cold and got ready to head out. I still didn't have the best equipment, but Liam brought an AR-10 with a high-end thermal scope that could pick up heat signatures even in near-zero visibility. That gave me some peace of mind. I might be half-blind in the snow, but at least one of us could see. And deep down, I think we both knew we weren't just hunting for answers anymore. We were hunting for someone. They weren't animals. They weren't even hiding. 4 of them, naked, human, and eating, huddled in the snow like it was just another night. I won't lie to you, I was scared. More than I wanted to admit, even to myself. Liam and I headed out into the woods, geared up and alert, and for a while we kept talking, trying to stay loose. But after about 45 minutes, the conversation died. The air between us got heavy, like we both felt the shift at the same time. That's when it sank in. This wasn't just some weekend hunting trip. We were walking into something real. I kept glancing over at Liam, wondering if I'd made a mistake dragging him into this. He didn't say anything, just kept walking. Eventually, we reached another split, just like last time. 2 sets of tracks branching off in separate directions. We picked the left path. 5 minutes in, the trail just ended. Clean. No signs of doubling back, no struggle, no reason. Just stopped. We backtracked, returned to the fork, and Liam muttered, "Whoever this is, they really don't want to be followed." That line stuck with me. It settled like lead in my stomach. We kept moving, following the second set of prints in silence. 3 more times we hit dead ends, each one just as perfect as the last. No extra footprints. No scuffs or drag marks. Just clean, confusing ends. Whoever we were tracking, they were good. Scary good. Liam pointed out something strange, something I hadn't thought about. The dead ends probably meant we were dealing with only one person. He said that if there were 2 or more, the trail would be harder to fake. That gave me some comfort, for a moment. Then the forest started to change. The sun was fading fast, and the trees grew denser. I didn't recognize anything anymore. We were deep. Way deeper than I'd ever been. The trail held steady for a while, no more diversions. Liam said they might have given up on faking us out, maybe because they knew how close we were getting. About 5 minutes later, the footprints started to sink deeper into the snow. We were gaining on them. Then, another set of prints. Fresh, and walking right alongside the originals. Liam let out a sharp breath and cursed under it. "I was wrong," he whispered. "There's more than one." I didn't answer. My throat was dry. It was nearly pitch black now. Liam kept checking his thermal scope every couple minutes. Without it, I would have turned back. We had some visibility thanks to the snow, but not enough. Not for this. We were quiet. Completely silent. Then Liam's arm shot out, pressing hard against my chest, stopping me in my tracks. I froze. He was staring straight ahead through the scope, still as a statue. His body didn't move. Didn't breathe. I watched him, trying to read his face, but he wasn't giving me anything. Just total, locked in focus. 20 seconds passed, maybe longer. Then he slowly crouched behind a nearby tree, dragging me down with him. I didn't question it. I just followed. He looked again through the scope. I saw his hand start to tremble. Not shaking, trembling. I couldn't take it anymore. I tapped his shoulder gently. He lowered the rifle, handed it to me without a word. I took the scope, braced myself, and looked. What I saw nearly made me scream. 4 human figures were crouched in the snow, huddled together. At first I thought they might be bears, based on their size, but no, these were people. 2 of them were big, hunched forward. The other 2 were smaller, children, maybe, and they were clinging to a tree, heads jerking around in wild, twitchy movements. All of them were naked. And they were eating something. I couldn't see faces or fine details. Thermal scopes don't give you that. Just heat and shape. But I saw enough to know they were alive. And they were feeding. Ripping something apart. I lowered the scope and swallowed hard. Liam didn't say anything. We just sat there, hidden, praying they didn't hear us. After a while, the two larger ones scooped up the smaller ones, hoisting them onto their backs. Then they turned and walked deeper into the woods. Like a family on a stroll. We didn't move. We didn't breathe. We waited under that tree for what felt like an hour, frozen in place by a fear that neither of us had words for. When we finally got back to the house, my fiancée was still awake. She looked like she hadn't moved from the couch. As soon as she saw us, she rushed over, demanding to know what happened. I told her, but only the basics. She was horrified anyway. We called the police that night. They said they'd send officers out first thing in the morning. Liam offered to stay the night and join the search, and I was beyond relieved. The next day, we combed through the woods with the cops, but it didn't take long before they called it off. The snow had started to fill in the tracks from the night before. There wasn't much left to follow. We pleaded with them to keep looking, but they said without any real crime or threat, they couldn't justify a full search. A few missing tools weren't enough. I don't blame them. But it didn't feel like closure. Liam and I knew what we saw. Winter's creeping back in now. The air's already cold again, and we're both wondering if they'll return. If they ever left. We're seriously thinking about moving, but nothing's set in stone yet. Something keeps us here. Maybe it's fear. Maybe it's hope that this was the end of it. But I doubt that. And the worst part? Not a single neighbor has experienced anything like this. Not one. It's just us. Why? Why our house? Some friends tell me it's nothing. Just weird people, nothing more. Others, they tell me I'm in real danger. And when I close my eyes at night, I'm starting to think they're right. They were taking things from me. Not everything. Just enough to keep me on edge. Just enough to let me know I wasn't alone out there. I think I'm finally going to seal off the yard. Fencing, cameras, whatever it takes to put a little distance between us and those woods. We're hoping to move soon, but nothing's certain yet. And honestly, after what happened last summer, I don't even know if moving will fix anything. It was supposed to be a reset. Something to clear my head. I'd always wanted to tackle a section of the Pacific Crest Trail solo. Just me, the wilderness, and the kind of silence that most people never really get to hear anymore. My plan was simple: park my car at the end, hitch a ride to the start point, and spend the next week and a half hiking my way back. It sounded so clean, so straightforward. And for the first few days it was. The trail was everything I'd hoped: miles of pine-lined paths, towering trees that reached like frozen giants into the sky, and winding routes that wrapped around hills and valleys like veins through the earth. I'm in good shape. I don't need to stop often, and I like keeping a steady rhythm when I hike. But I don't mess with nightfall in the woods. When it gets dark, I stop. I always pitch my tent just a little off the main trail, hidden enough to avoid any unwanted company. Not that I expected any. Solo hikers tend to attract attention, and I've always preferred staying invisible. The third night changed everything. I woke up to that unmistakable feeling: something's wrong. No sound. No movement. Just a gut-deep knowing that I needed to be awake. I scanned the inside of the tent, heart pounding, but everything seemed normal. Still, I grabbed my flashlight, loaded the rifle, and stepped outside. There was no one. No movement. No sound beyond the trees shifting in the breeze. I returned to the tent, uneasy, and started checking my gear. That's when I noticed it: my wallet was gone. At first, I told myself I must have misplaced it. Maybe it slipped out when I was reorganizing. But I tore through every inch of that tent. It was gone. Credit cards. License. Cash. My identity, just gone. The idea that someone had come into my tent, stolen my wallet, and left without waking me? That didn't sit right. And still, I tried to tell myself I had just screwed up. That I was being paranoid. But over the next few days, things kept disappearing. Small items at first. One of my lighters. My Swiss Army knife. A couple energy bars. Too random to be valuable. Too deliberate to be coincidence. By day 4 I knew. I was being stalked. There was no cell signal. No way to call for help. No way to warn anyone. I thought about turning back, but it would have only saved me 2, maybe 3 days. And either direction meant at least one more night in the woods. Alone. With them. I kept moving. One step at a time. And yet one question kept crawling back into my head, digging like a thorn. Why hadn't they taken my rifle? They'd stolen everything else. Everything but the one thing that could protect me. They weren't just taking, they were toying with me. That night, I tied my tent shut from the inside. Not a knot, multiple, all looped and reinforced. Just in case. I tried to stay awake. But exhaustion won. When I woke, the tent was still sealed. No signs of entry. Nothing missing. But by then, the damage was done. The paranoia had taken root. And it was growing fast. Every second on the trail was agony. I've never had anxiety, not in my entire life. But I can tell you without a shadow of doubt, those next few days broke something in me. Imagine it. You're alone in the middle of nowhere, with someone following behind you. Watching you. Taking from you. And you have no idea who they are, or what they want. I kept moving. Because what else could I do? And then the hallucination started. A rustle in the bushes? Just wind. A flicker of movement? Gone the second I turned my head. I knew my mind was unraveling, but I couldn't stop it. The one moment I remember vividly, the one that still haunts me, was when I stepped into a puddle. I felt it, cold water soaking through my sock, the splash echoing off the nearby trees. I almost tripped. But when I looked down, the ground was bone dry. I stood there, staring, trying to make sense of it. Nothing. No mud. No moisture. Just the feel of wet fabric clinging to my foot like a phantom memory. The days were hard. But the nights were worse. He was wearing my shorts. And I hadn't even noticed they were gone. That night in the woods nearly broke me. I tied the tent shut tight, slept curled up next to my rifle, but none of it helped. The anxiety had sunk its claws in deep. At one point, I had to splash ice-cold water on my face just to stop myself from spiraling. Thankfully, the hallucinations quieted after that. If they hadn't, I honestly don't know what I would have done. But peace didn't last long. The next night, I woke up to the unmistakable sound of footsteps circling my tent. Not crunching leaves. Not a raccoon scurrying by. Footsteps, slow, measured, like someone trying not to be heard. I grabbed my rifle, heart thundering, but I couldn't move. My body was frozen in fear. I lay there, clutching the weapon, listening to those steps shift around me, until they finally faded into the darkness. I don't know how long I stayed like that, but I didn't sleep a second after. I waited for sunlight like it was the only thing keeping me alive. When dawn finally broke, I was a wreck, shaking so hard I could barely pack my gear. I knew I couldn't spend another night out there. I was close. A day and a quarter from my car, maybe less if I pushed hard. So I made a decision. I was getting out. No more stops. No more sleep. I'd hike through the night if I had to. The hours blurred together. I pushed my body to the edge, hiking as fast as my legs would allow. When the sun began to sink, I didn't slow down. I gritted my teeth and pressed on, deeper into the dark. By the time night fully fell, I figured I had maybe 2 hours left. I had my flashlight in one hand, my rifle in the other, breathing steady but strained. Every crack of a twig made me jump. Every gust of wind felt like a whisper. I had never hiked in complete darkness before. And it was far more terrifying than I'd imagined. Then, maybe an hour in, I heard it. Footsteps. Behind me. I stopped cold, spun around, and raised the flashlight. I caught movement, something ducking behind a tree. I didn't even hesitate. I aimed my rifle and shouted for them to step out. And they did. What stepped out was human technically, but barely. He was filthy, his skin scratched and raw. His face was wild, overgrown with tangled facial hair, and his eyes, they weren't right. But the thing that made my blood run cold? He was wearing a pair of my shorts. Ones I hadn't even noticed were missing. He took a step toward me. Then another. I shouted again, rifle trained dead center. He kept walking. So I fired a warning shot, off to the side, just enough to make my point. He flinched like a startled animal, then bolted. Fast. Disappearing into the woods like he knew them by heart. I didn't wait. I turned and ran, hard hammering, crashing through the trail until my car came into view. I slammed the door, locked it, and called the police. I was barely coherent when they arrived, but once they saw the state I was in, and heard what had happened, they told me flat out. You don't want to stick around. They didn't need to tell me twice. I left that night, and I've never looked back. To this day, the hallucinations mess with my head more than anything else. I didn't think it was possible to imagine something so vividly. The water, the shadows, the feeling of being watched. And then seeing someone wearing your clothes like they'd been playing with you the whole time? Yeah. That broke something in me. I won't be hiking solo again anytime soon. Maybe not ever. If you're planning a trip on the Pacific Crest Trail, bring someone. And bring a gun. I think about that week a lot. Probably more than I should. But that wasn't even the last disturbing thing I've heard. You ever hear something on the radio you weren't supposed to? What I'm about to share was told to me years ago, by my best friend. He'd heard it so many times from his dad that it was burned into his brain. It's the kind of story that sits with you. Lurks in your mind long after it's been told. I still think about it sometimes, especially when I'm out in the woods and everything goes a little too quiet. My friend's dad was a logger, a tree saw operator, to be exact. If you've never seen one, a tree saw is this massive piece of equipment built to cut down towering trees and slice them with precision. It's the kind of job that puts you alone in the most remote, untouched forests of the Pacific Northwest. It paid based on how many trees you felled, not how long you worked, so most days were brutal. 16 to 20 hours at a time, grinding through timber with only the sounds of steel and falling trees for company. Sometimes he worked alone. Sometimes with Elliot, his close friend and fellow operator. When they were at opposite ends of a job site, they kept in contact by radio. Constant chatter back and forth, just to stay sane. Then there was this one job. A mountain site so isolated that the company had to spend 3 weeks just clearing a road wide enough to get equipment up there. By the time the team arrived, they were higher than most people ever dared to go. 10 days in, everything was running smoothly. Then the radio started acting strange. It began with static, normal enough. But under the static were voices. Faint. Muffled. Like whispers cutting through the white noise. You couldn't make out words, but they were definitely voices. They tried switching channels. Didn't matter. The voices followed them. And that's when things got weird. They heard voices. Then footsteps. Then scratching. And when the door finally opened, it wasn't to let someone in, it was to let the nightmare begin. It should have been impossible. Switching radio channels mid-conversation? That's not something someone can just follow you through, not without gear. Not without knowing you. But as they climbed higher up the mountain, the voices only got clearer. Still muffled, sure, but more distinct. Less like random static and more like actual conversation. The problem was, the words didn't make sense. It sounded casual, too casual. Like two people talking about dinner plans, or how to split up supplies. But they were alone. Or they were supposed to be. That's when things started to unravel. They began finding signs that others had been there before them. Empty cans. Boot prints in the dirt. Small makeshift fire pits and crushed tent circles, tucked just out of sight. It wasn't just eerie, it was impossible. The job site was remote as hell. You needed a convoy of trucks and equipment just to get there. So who else had made it? And how? Why? Then Elliot found the tent. It was just off the trail, hidden behind a thick patch of undergrowth. He radioed my friend's dad to come check it out. What they found inside still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. One sleeping bag. A duffel bag. And inside that duffel, children's underwear. Multiple pairs. Rope. Duct tape. And crude, hand-drawn sketches of children being abused. Distorted, sick drawings that made your stomach turn. There were photos too. One showed a freshly bitten apple, still wet. Whoever had been there hadn't left long ago. Elliot wanted to pack up and leave. Immediately. But my friend's dad, always the stubborn one, insisted they finish the job. He said they'd come too far, and besides, there hadn't been a confrontation. Not yet. So they agreed on a compromise: radio silence unless it was an emergency. No more casual chatter. Just work. Just get through it. That night, the dread set in like frostbite. They sat in the camper in total silence. And then the radio crackled again. Only this time, the voices were clearer. Two men. Talking casually. One mentioned collecting firewood. The other asked if there was any water left. It sounded normal. Too normal. Like a couple of guys relaxing after a long day. But knowing what they'd found in that duffel bag, that changed everything. Elliot stayed calm. But my friend's dad was unraveling. Every shadow outside the camper felt like a figure waiting to move. Every creak was a breath being held. And then he snapped. The next time the voices came through the radio, talking about gathering kindling, he grabbed the transmitter and spoke, demanding to know who they were and why they were there. Silence. Not static. Just silence. The air turned to stone. Elliot flipped. He was furious, said my friend's dad had just given away their position. That he'd made things worse. But there wasn't much to argue about. They were already in too deep. That night, around midnight, Elliot shook my friend's dad awake. Someone's outside. He could barely get the words out. They both sat up, straining to listen. The sound was soft, but clear. Footsteps. Crunching gravel. Moving slowly around the camper. My friend's dad reached for his gun, and realized it wasn't loaded. He didn't know where the ammo was. Elliot was unarmed. And the idea of calling the police was a joke. No signal, no hope, no time. Then came the handle. The camper door jiggled. Not hard. Not aggressive. Just testing. They froze. And then the scratching started. Long, slow scratches down the door. Fingernails or a blade, they couldn't tell. But it was deliberate. Taunting. For minutes of pure, paralyzing hell. Finally, my friend's dad nodded. He was going to check it. He crept toward the door, flashlight in hand, heart pounding in his ears. Just as he reached it, the door exploded open. A knife slashed across his face. Pain bloomed white-hot as he tumbled to the ground. Before he could even react, a man was on top of him, knife pressed to his throat. Then another figure appeared, kicking him repeatedly in the head. Elliot didn't hesitate. He launched himself out of the camper, tackling the man with the knife. They tumbled across the gravel. The second attacker took off into the trees. The one Elliot tackled managed to slip away and followed. They vanished into the darkness, swallowed whole by the mountain. Elliot helped drag my friend's dad back into the truck, blood pouring down his face. They drove for 2 straight hours to the nearest hospital. When they arrived, his face was a mangled mess, deep cuts, a fractured eye socket, and a wound that left his right pupil permanently misshapen. They filed a report. But nothing ever came of it. And 2 weeks later, one of their coworkers, someone who'd stayed behind to finish the job, was found bound, gagged, raped, and murdered in a ditch not far from camp. No arrests. No suspects. Nothing. My friend's dad still suffers from PTSD to this day. And his eye? The one with the torn pupil? It's a constant reminder of what happened that night. A scar that never fades. That story buried itself deep in me. Ever since, I've had a very real, very primal fear of deep woods. It's one thing to be alone out there. It's another to realize you're not. I haven't seen my friend or his dad in years. I just hope they're doing okay. The house had always felt a little too quiet. But moving downstairs? That's when things really started to change. When I was 22, I moved into the downstairs apartment of my parents' house. Seemed like a smart move, save money, have my own space, and still get a bit of privacy. But it wasn't really private. My parents were around often, and when they were gone, the house still felt occupied. Like I wasn't the only one living there. I couldn't have friends over without feeling watched. Couldn't relax, couldn't invite dates over without it turning into some awkward, hushed affair. The place had a weird energy. And it was about to get worse. Someone tried the doorknob again. But this time, they knocked first. The downstairs apartment in my parents' house was nothing special, but it gave me space. It was an open layout, mini kitchen right off the living room, with my bedroom, bathroom, and laundry room tucked down a short hall. There was also a side entrance that led out through the living room, so for the most part, I could come and go without disturbing anyone. On weekends when my parents were away, I could finally let loose. No tiptoeing. No awkward silences. That Friday night was one of those rare windows of freedom. My friends Miles and Cole came over, and we just chilled, some drinks, music blasting, hockey game on the TV. The vibe was relaxed, but I definitely had a buzz going by the end of the night. Not blackout drunk, just comfortably numb. Since my parents were gone, I'd left the door to the upstairs unlocked. It made it easier to run up and grab stuff, especially drinks. I kept everything in the upstairs fridge since it was way bigger and honestly just worked better. Neither Miles nor Cole were in shape to drive, so they both crashed at my place. The couch was massive, plenty of room for both of them. After we called it a night, I headed to my room and knocked out fast. A few hours later, I woke up suddenly. It was still pitch dark, probably middle of the night. At first, I didn't know what stirred me, but then I heard it, footsteps. Coming from upstairs. Naturally, I figured one of the guys had gotten thirsty and gone up to grab water. No big deal. I was tired, didn't feel like moving, so I closed my eyes again. Then, my bedroom doorknob turned. It was locked, always is. Habit. But someone on the other side was trying to come in. I waited. They didn't knock. Just gave the knob a little jiggle, then, silence. I assumed it was Cole or Miles stumbling around in a drunken haze. I didn't feel like talking, didn't want to deal with the awkward half-drunk conversation. So I stayed quiet, didn't say a word. Eventually, I fell back asleep. When morning came, Miles was already gone. Cole was still out cold on the couch. As I opened the fridge, he stirred awake, rubbing his eyes. "Yo," I asked casually. "Did you try coming into my room last night?" Cole squinted like he was trying to remember. "No, man. I don't think so. I was pretty gone though. Sorry if I did." It didn't seem like a big deal, so I let it go. We grabbed some bacon, egg, and cheese sandwiches from the deli, ate in the backyard, and then he headed out. I didn't bother texting Miles. It honestly didn't seem worth it. That whole Saturday I was out with other friends, didn't get home until late. I was sober by then, tired, but clear-headed. Had a quick snack, washed up, and got in bed. Flipped on the TV and zoned out for an hour or so before finally turning it off. That's when it started again. Creaks. Thumps. Above me. At first it was subtle, just light sounds coming from the kitchen directly overhead. I sat up and listened, holding my breath. Then, silence. My heart started picking up speed. A tightness twisted in my stomach. I told myself it was the house settling. Old wood. Cold air. Whatever. I laid back down, tried to relax. But then the doorknob turned again. I bolted upright in bed. No hesitation. That sound wasn't in my head. This time, the twist of the knob was followed by a light knock. Knock, twist. I reached for my phone. Started texting everyone I could, my parents, Miles, Cole. I was praying, begging, that one of them would reply and say it was them. Just messing around. Some dumb prank. Nothing. My parents were probably asleep. They weren't even supposed to be back until Monday. And deep down, I knew, this wasn't Cole. This wasn't Miles. I didn't call out. I didn't ask who it was. Instead, I slid out of bed, silent as I could, and crouched behind the corner dresser. I grabbed the heaviest object I could find, a thick glass candle holder, and held my breath. If someone kicked that door in, I was ready to fight. I sat there in the dark, gripping cold glass and waiting for the sound of footsteps or a breath near the crack in the door. Nothing. 10 agonizing minutes passed. No more knocking. No more twisting. Just silence. Finally, I picked up my phone again and dialed 911. I pressed the phone close and whispered, barely loud enough to be heard. "There's someone in the house. Someone was under my parents' bed. And he wasn't trying to hide anymore." I stayed on the line with the 911 operator, whispering into the phone from behind the dresser as my heart pounded so hard it felt like it might shake the floor. I didn't feel safe enough to leave the room, so I asked if the responding officers could meet me at my bedroom window. Thank God I was on the first floor. A few minutes later, I heard a gentle knock on the glass. I crept over, flashlight still in one hand, and saw the silhouette of a uniformed officer staring in at me. I unlatched the lock and slid the window open, my breath visible in the cold air. I handed him the key to the side entrance. Moments later, I heard the faint creak of the door opening, followed by footsteps. Finally, I left my room. 2 officers met me in the hallway, their flashlights sweeping across the walls of my small apartment. I flipped on every light I could reach. The downstairs space didn't offer much room to hide, an open layout, bare corners, nothing but the usual furniture. The search down there didn't take long. Then we moved upstairs. I walked behind them, heart in my throat, explaining which rooms were which as we went. When we reached my parents' bedroom, I waited in the hallway as they pushed the door open. 30 seconds later, everything changed. There was shouting, sharp, startled voices, and the sound of movement. I peeked through the door and saw the 2 officers yelling, guns raised, at someone beneath the bed. My blood turned to ice. One of the officers turned and barked at me to go downstairs. I didn't argue. Minutes later, they came down, escorting a tall, filthy man in a baggy sweatshirt and a pair of shorts. His legs were covered in dirt. His eyes were wild. And the expression on his face? Pure hatred. He glared at me like he'd been waiting for this moment. "Do you know this man?" one of the officers asked. I shook my head. No. Never seen him in my life. They took him out of the house. And with every step he took away from me, my lungs felt lighter. The officers said if we wanted to press charges or follow up, we could contact the precinct. But because he hadn't stolen anything, and technically hadn't attacked anyone, there wasn't much they could do. That was that. After they left, I texted every group chat I had, family, friends, anyone who might be awake. A few responded, but most were asleep. I called my parents as soon as the sun came up. Told them everything. They were stunned. But since nothing was missing, and the guy seemed homeless, they didn't pursue any legal action. Said it wasn't worth the trouble. I keep thinking maybe I left the front door unlocked that night Miles and Cole were over, music blasting so loud we never heard him come in. But there's a darker thought I can't shake. What if he'd been in the house longer than that? What if he'd already been hiding somewhere, watching us, waiting, while we drank and laughed on the couch just a few feet away?